So we're here at CA Day, and it's funny, the first interview, the interview we did with Charles, he said you should always interview academics in front of a bookshelf, but unfortunately...
Right, okay, yeah, we just have to imagine the books.
Yeah, well there are lots of books behind these blinds, I think that's the illusion for the camera. So, yeah, we'd just like to ask you really about speaking of books, we'd like to ask you about the book that you've recently released, Conversation Analysis, which is a textbook overview of conversation analysis. And really the first question I'd like to ask is, how did you come to write the book? What inspired you to write the book?
Well, I'd been teaching CA for nearly 20 years when I first started to think I might be able to do this, and that it might be, perhaps selfishly, an interesting exercise for me, because my feeling has been I've never really understood anything properly until I've started to try to explain it to other people. So there was the sense that, I've done it for nearly 20 years, and so I'm just beginning to get to grips with this. And let's see if I can put it down on paper. But there was also another sort of impetus, which was from my distinct position in a linguistics department and teaching a lot of students whose first language was not English. And of course that's distinct from the conversation analytic origins in sociology, and also it's very Anglo European, Anglo-eccentric in a sense, beginnings. So I felt there was something distinctive I could try to do, which is to show that there was a fantastic amount of terrific work being done by linguists who had specific training, for example, phoneticians, who might be publishing in specialist phonetics journals that might not get into the mainstream of conversation analysis journals. So there was that. It was perhaps broadening out the sense of what CA could be, but also showing that for the last 20 years or more, there's been a fantastic amount of CA work done in languages other than English. So it's of course, given the history of CA, there's still lots and lots and lots of English in it. But I hope I've given a sense that there's some wonderful stuff being done on languages other than English as well. So that was really the main impetus.
And I suppose when it comes to laying out the foundational elements of conversation analysis and introducing conversation analysis in that way, I mean, we've seen it this afternoon during Andrew's talk. There are lots of different ways in which you can go about presenting that information, lots of different ways in which you can structure and order it. I was just wondering how you went about deciding on the structure for your book.
Well, I think the central chapters, in a way, chose themselves. Because the procedural infrastructure of interaction, there had to be a chapter on turn-taking, there had to be a chapter on repair, sequence organisation, and so forth. There also had to be some history and background. But what I thought that I would benefit from was some material which related the transcription to the analysis. So often transcription conventions, for example, are relegated to the end of a chapter or a paper. And I really wanted to bring that into the main text and the argument, because I've heard so often from people outside CA, why all the detail, why all the confusing mess of symbols, and what's all that for? And I've heard other people say to students who are beginning in CA, I mean other people outside CA, but you don't need all that detail. So I thought it was important to lock the analysis down with an account or some sort of account of transcription. So I thought that was important to include. And then I think that there's been, since I think that other textbooks in conversation analysis, there's been a huge amount of work on epistemics that related centrally to issues of identity and knowledge and so forth. And so that argued its way into the book as well. So the central elements, I knew what they would be, but then I had to sit down and figure out what the logical progression should be, really.
Sure.
Yeah.
And related to that, because you've already mentioned that you're drawing upon quite a wide body of research in the book, I was wondering if you faced any particular challenges in synthesizing so much research and bringing it all together into a single volume.
Goodness, yes. I still come across bits of data that I should have included. That would have made a perfect point here. And I came across a bit of data the other day that I was really surprised I hadn't. How did I overlook that? So, but just through sheer forgetfulness, there were things I left out. There were also things I would love to have included and spent more time on, such as embodiment, but because of the way the book was presented as a primarily linguistic introduction, did not argue as strongly to be included, really. I mean, I could have spent a lot of time, I could have given a chapter to it and so forth. And inevitably, there was a lot of material on different languages that I wish I could have been able to include, and it was just a matter of space, really. So yes, I had a very, very difficult time deciding what to leave out, and I had to be unsentimental.
Yeah. So I suppose what I want to ask you about next, because the book has been hugely successful. I mean, the memory I have is that the week the book came out, I was looking on Twitter and there were so many photos of people
really nice,
holding up their copies of the book very, very proudly. I was just wondering if you had any particularly interesting reactions via email or conferences and things.
I have. I've been enormously touched by how it's been received, and I have to say, particularly from people who taught me, from whose wisdom I benefited from, over the years. So that was amazing. When an email came from someone, I thought, but I sat at your feet. That's been terrific, gratifying. But equally, people who I haven't known until they've come up to me and said, "Oh, I enjoyed the book. I'm glad you're representing my language and showing what CA can do." That's been amazing. So I've been bowled over by the reception. So equally people who I haven't known at all, but also people who taught me, which has been great.
And finally, I just wanted to ask you about what you're currently working on.
I'm involved in quite a large project on indirectness, which is of course not a CA term, it's a linguistic term. But I have a terrific corpus of filmed family interaction, British family filmed over 100 days. And one thing I'm focusing on at the moment is what are familiarly known as indirect directives. So, is that your coat on the floor instead of pick it up? And that's taking me in all sorts of really interesting directions. So there's terrific work that I'm benefiting from on incipient compliance, Alex Kent's wonderful PhD work, and work she's developed. And it's taking me into areas of reference, locally initial, locally subsequent reference, and places and forms and fit or the misfit between these things. So that's taken me all sorts of interesting places. That's one project. Another I'm doing at the moment, and I presented on with Ariel today, is the open palm gesture. It might have a new name by the time it sees the light of day properly, but we're finding recurrent instances of this family of gestures in both Mexican, Spanish and English interaction. So we're doing some work on that, and that is fascinating. But there are lots and lots of embryonic little projects that emerge, of course, out of the data. The minute you have a data session, every week with my students, I have a data session, and we come out with a number of other projects, and that's what happens when you look at data. So it's exciting.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for. Thank you again for agreeing to be interviewed.
Well, thank you. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.